Hi, I'm Stephanie Hutchins, life coach and owner of Serotinous Life. And I'm coming on today to talk about uh, how far we can fall after experiencing trauma and, how hard it is to get back out of that hole once we fall in it and all the devastation that can be left behind in that process of falling in and getting back out. And so to start, I'd like to do, it's a little bit of a longer reading, but a reading from my first book. Can you see it? Transformation After Trauma, Embracing Post-Traumatic Growth, because it's very applicable to what I'm discussing today. And so chapter 2 of this book is called Habits to Replace. And so what you have to understand if you haven't read this book is that the book includes the majority of the book is focused on the tools, the positive coping tools I used to move forward after my trauma and really thrive after my trauma. But before I get into those tools, I recognize that in trying to figure out how to cope after our trauma, we can acquire a number of habits that are not useful to us in the long term. Because what you have to understand about all trauma, what all trauma has in common is that it leaves us with an inability to cope. And it gives us an immense feeling of a loss of control. And so in order to gain control back, and to figure out how to just survive in the aftermath of our trauma, we can hold on to things that just give us a moment's relief or just a break from the memories of our trauma, even if they're not useful to us. And so that may include overeating, drinking, sex, using drugs, cutting yourself. There's a whole host of coping strategies people try to use to try to gain back control and just figure out how to survive that can help in the short term, but hurt them and others around them in the long term. And so, so to begin, I'll start the reading. So starting right from the beginning of chapter 2. Throughout my life, I've put myself in so many dangerous situations due to bad habits. When I think of how many times I've been in situations where I was physically and emotionally hurt, I also have to think of how many times I've been spared from pain and even death. For example, I was casually sleeping with a guy who wanted me to bring him to a place. I offered to drive him there, but in the middle of the trip, he randomly switched to a different destination. It totally threw me for a loop. But when I stopped the car and spoke up saying no, things got ugly. He looked at me, stuck out his tongue, and there was a hidden razor blade in his mouth. He casually took it off his tongue and said, "Drive." At that point, I decided to take him where he wanted to go because I was afraid of being harmed. Another time, I was stranded in New York City late at night. The guy I was sleeping with and I headed into New York City to see some of his friends. I ended up stuck in an apartment with a bunch of random people while he proceeded to take all my money, drive off with my car, wreck it, and flee the scene of the crime. At this point, I had to leave the apartment and go to the police station and explain what had happened to the car. When I was done, it was clear I couldn't just stay at the station. I had nowhere to go. I didn't know anyone in the city. After walking into motel after motel, inquiring about their rates, I ended up meeting a guy who was also looking for a cheap place to stay. We found a really inexpensive motel and split the cost of a really creepy room with a few dollars I was able to withdraw from my bank account at the ATM. While we had to sleep in the same bed, nothing sexual happened. I remain immensely grateful to this day that I wasn't hurt or killed that night. That was one of the lowest points in my life. while promiscuity had been a long time habit of mine after Stan died. Oh, and so, that's one of my traumas, is finding my significant other, Stan, dead. So after Stan died, I began to bring men into my life who were extremely dysfunctional, but I chose to bring them into my life rather than being forced to out of sheer necessity. Most days I was unable to work because I had fallen into such a deep depression. During this time, I started looking for men to pay my bills on Craigslist in exchange for sexual favors. Believe it or not, I was reported and banned from posting on Craigslist for a while because of my solicitous posts. I didn't post pictures of myself or come out and directly offer sex, but it was obvious what I was suggesting. I was at risk of financial ruin. I was sleeping with numerous men, so I figured I might as well get financial rewards from passing out my body to any man who showed interest in me. I never ended up sleeping with men in exchange for financial favors, but knowing I got to the point where I would have still brings up a lot of shame inside of me. And it does. Even reading that, I sort of get this feeling of, it's almost like a queasiness kind of feeling, like that was me, that was my life. And when I think about where I am today, it's hard for me to even realize that that was me, because my life today is barely recognizable. My existence is completely different now than it was back then when I was barely surviving. And that's, what I'd like to discuss today, is that, us just trying to survive after we experience this tremendous pain in our life. And that's really what we're doing. And I need you to understand that I don't, I'm not, with this video, not trying to encourage you to feel shame for all that you've done to survive. And I'm not trying to make you feel bad for everything that you've done to survive. We're all just doing the best we can to just muddle through in the aftermath of trauma. But what can happen, though, is after a while of practicing the same behavior over and over again, it can become a habit. So one thing about me, if you're not familiar, is that I spent 12 years of my life as a college professor teaching mostly about the human body. And that included the human brain. And one thing you must understand about our brain is that it's all about efficiency. Actually, most aspects of our body are all about efficiency. And so what our brain wants to do is put things on, as many things as possible, on automatic, so it doesn't have to think about it. It can make automatic decisions without having to take up higher brain centers that are needed for other activities in day-to-day life that do require decision making. So what that means is, when we practice a habit or we practice a behavior, okay, whether that be drinking, overeating, turning to rage and anger, just even things like even procrastinating, okay, anything that you can think of that you may turn to avoid feeling a certain way, can become a habit over time. If you practice it enough, your brain will start putting it on automatic pilot, so you start doing it without you even thinking it. So even though in the beginning, all of those things, you may have started doing it because it served you, eventually you start doing it over and over without even thinking about it. And what can happen over time is it wears out its usefulness. And what can happen is it puts us on a path of destruction. Okay. And that's what I was on in this section of the book that I'm talking about. I was just self-destructing in all sorts of ways. I was just destroying myself. And I really want to ask you to think about that. I don't know where you're at in your healing journey, but I encourage you to really think about whether it's necessary for you to destroy yourself and everything you love in the process of trying to figure out how to move forward after your trauma. Luckily, I fell far, but I didn't fall as far as I could have. I didn't end up prostituting myself. I didn't end up with a drug or alcohol addiction. But I could have with the path that I was on. And I hurt a lot of people, not only just myself, but I hurt a lot of people in the process of my traumas, and my clients are the same way. I mean, you name it. I mean, my clients and I together have hurt everyone in our life. And I want you to consider whether it's necessary for you to continue to hurt yourself and the people you love and destroy everything you have in your life while you figure out how to muddle through your existence after experiencing the tremendous pain that you have. I encourage you to think about whether you've reached the place right now where you're at. Have you reached the point of saying, enough is enough? I am tired of self-destructing. I'm tired of hurting the people around me, and I'm tired of constantly being scared of being at risk of losing everything. And if you have reached that extreme low point, is it enough for you to say, I've had enough of letting my trauma control my life? And I think that's the point. I started out by saying that what all trauma has in common is that it leaves us with a sense of a loss of control and an inability to cope. And we try to hang on to whatever we can to gain back control. But I encourage you to think of the other ways that you can practice control over your life. Like, you can practice control by saying you've had enough with existing the way that you're existing, because I need you to understand that at any point you choose, you can change the way you're experiencing life. And I know that may be hard to believe, okay, depending where you're at in your healing journey, but it's possible. Here I was, and I go into much more detail on the negative coping mechanisms I had after my traumas in my book, but I was in a very low place, and I contemplated suicide on a daily basis for years. And but now I am in a completely different place, okay? Because I decided that I didn't want to live the way that I was living anymore, but I still wanted to live. Okay, so I needed to figure a way out, and I did. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that my traumas never affect me, because they do. I mean, we never forget our traumas. And if you haven't already, in my list of videos, I did a whole video on why we'll never forget our trauma. It's just how our brain works. And so we have to figure out a way to move forward, even though we're lugging these memories behind us. Okay. But we can move forward without those painful memories taking over every aspect of our existence. Okay. And I feel in many ways that it's empowering to know that we can choose at any moment to move forward from our painful past, even though we have to carry those memories forward. And I think about, I look at, another thing I do, I minimize how much time I spend looking at the news every day, because it's quite distressing to see all the ways that we hurt one another. And we know that ourselves, from our traumas and our experiences in life, that humans bring immense pain upon other humans and all living organisms. But we hurt each other immensely, and we do it because of the pain we're carrying. And we haven't figured out a way to deal with our pain in a way that's productive. And so we hurt ourselves and others in the process. And this is why we get generational trauma with pain being transmitted from one generation to the next because parents and grandparents haven't learned how to deal with their pain. But I need you to understand that at any point, if you have experienced a lot of pain in your family, you can be the one to change that trajectory, to break the pattern. And if enough people start doing that within our communities, we can start breaking patterns of generational trauma that just is reflected in so many different ways in our communities. And so I encourage you to think of moving forward through your pain, not only as a benefit to yourself, but as a benefit to those that you love and to your community as a whole. And I say this not to you to make you feel like it is your responsibility to take care of yourself and everyone around you, but I sometimes it helps people to think that meaning can be made of their trauma. And we always have a choice after our pain. We can either make others hurt because of the pain we've experienced, or we can change the pattern. We can break the pattern and choose never to repeat that cycle again because of the pain we've experienced. And I'm just offering you that choice to think about, is whether you want to continue to repeat the pattern that you've experienced in your life and the patterns that you're perpetuating in your own life with your habits that you're continuing with, or do you want to choose to move forward? Okay. And I need you to know at any point you can change. And I can already hear, some people listening to this maybe say, well, I can't change. This is who I am, but it's just not true. We get these ideas in our head that, if we're quick to anger, if we procrastinate, or if we're impatient, that these are just character flaws and we can't do anything about it. Or because we had such tremendous hardship in our life, we can't do anything to change how we are. But it's just not true. It's not true. And I know this from my own experience. I know from all of the research I've done. I know from my years of teaching and studying about the human body and mind. It's just not true. And if you are battling with this idea that our personality isn't permanent, I encourage you to read the book. It's called Personality Isn't Permanent by Benjamin Hardy. It is one of my all-time favorite books, and it is so good for those of us who have experienced trauma, because it provides us with all sorts of insight and tools for being able to realize that we don't have to be anchored. We don't have to be saddled by this unchangeable past of ours, that we can move forward at any moment and change the way that we're experiencing life at any moment we choose. I mean, every single year of my life, I'm changing. And even if I look at my life today from 5 years ago, I'm different. And oh boy, if you look 10, 15 years ago, my life is barely recognizable. And I've completely transformed the way I've experienced my life. And people who I spend time with, my family and friends, they always notice it. They'll always say, I can't believe how much you've changed. I've changed physically. I've lost a tremendous amount of weight, and I've changed emotionally. I've changed I used to be very quick to anger. I used to be very emotional, very quick to cry. Not like that anymore. Of course, I still get angry. Of course, I still cry. I'm just not like quick to it. I mean, it takes quite a bit for me to get there. And I still struggle with anxiety, but it's nowhere near the level it used to be. I'm much more just at peace, and my life just isn't, I don't allow people and circumstances around me to control me the way they used to, because really that's what it's about. If you allow a person or situation to cause you to fly off the handle in just seconds, you have lost control in that moment. You allowed a person or circumstance to gain control over you. And I encourage you to think of how empowering it is to know that you have the ability to choose to not let people and circumstances control you any longer at any point you choose. And so over time I've practiced. So I used to use, overeating and overworking and over exercising and sleeping with random strangers and hurting my body in different ways. I use these as ways to practice control. But now I practice controls in different way. I practice control by controlling my breathing when I'm overwhelmed. Okay, instead of flying off the handle or crying hysterically when maybe it wasn't warranted in that moment. I practice control by working on my self-talk instead of allowing myself to get into a debate that I'll never win with, a person who just wants to be combative in the moment. And so that's why in my book, if I focus, again, the majority of it is on the tools I used to really regain control back of my life and not continue to allow my unchangeable past to control me. I was tired of hurting myself. I was tired of hurting the people I loved. And I was tired of always being afraid of losing my home and my job because I couldn't control my emotions. And so I had to get help. A lot of it I did figure out on my own, but it involved me getting help. And I encourage you to do the same. If you don't know where to begin, yes, of course, I of course believe that my book is a great place to start to give you tools that you can use on your own. But some of our traumas are just so big that they require another person to help, like a therapist or other trained professional. But what I will say is when you start that journey of finding a professional to help you along your healing path, know that you may not find the perfect person right off the bat. Okay. I need you to be mentally prepared for that because it took me a few tries to find a therapist that just really was a good fit for me. And I gave up at times looking for somebody to help me because of some really bad experiences I had with other therapists. But I eventually kept trying, and eventually I found a therapist that changed everything for me. And of course, she wasn't with me every day, so I had to use a lot of tools to make it through my hard days. And that's, again, what I focus on is the tool in my book is the tools I use to get me through those hard days. And when I reached particularly difficult stumbling blocks, that's when I could bring it to my therapy sessions and we could work it through. And so I encourage you to take those steps necessary to break, these patterns of just harm that either you're doing to yourself or others, or patterns of harm that are cycling through your relationships, particularly your family, and doing what you can to break the cycle. I don't know how old you are, but here I am. I'm going to be 40 years old next month. And what if I live to be another 40, 50 years, or live 40 or 50 years more? I don't want to keep perpetuating these cycles of pain that I was living with for all these years. I want to live a life that's within my control. And I want to stop hurting people because of the ways that I've been hurt. And I want you to know that you can make that same choice at any point you choose. And if today is not the day for you to make that choice, that's completely okay. Again, I'm not going to shame you and make you feel bad for you not being at that place where you're ready to change. But what I just want you to encourage, I want to encourage you to carry along with you is the knowledge that you can change at any point you choose. So at any point you reach where you just are tired of hurting yourself and others and you've had enough, you can choose to change the way you're experiencing life. And in many ways, that's exciting. Even if you can't harness that feeling of excitement right now, I hope that you will in the future. So as always, if you have any questions, I encourage you to reach out, and I wish you well on your healing journey. And know if you're experiencing some hard times, it will get easier. You just have to keep going and not give up. Okay. And all right, that's all for now. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.